All right, looks like we are live. I've got the stream running. We're still a few seconds early, but we're getting close here. I got the chat open. Lots of people jumping in already. Wow. Awesome. If you're out there, say something in the chat. Let me know that, number one, you can see me. Number two, you can hear me. I would appreciate that if you would do that. Mark's here. Hello. Douglas is here. Live and audio sounds good. Wow. That's subjective. All right. Awesome. We have hit 8 o'clock. Vincent's saying that it's a little warm in Albany, huh? Shocking. I was going to talk a little bit about that. Yeah, I don't know if it's hot where you guys are, but yeah, here today in the at the beginning of the Pocono Mountains, we were in the upper 90s, close to 100 today. So it's very unusual. And, you know, I didn't have the air on in the shop, and it overwhelmed everything here. So it's finally just now at 8 p.m. Eastern starting to get a little on the cool side here in the shop. Leo's here. Awesome. Hope everything's going well, Leo. Oh, Larry G. Imagine that. I can hear you, and I'm afraid of shapers. Too bad. John's here. Great. We're doing good. Except someone's having a bad hair day. Would that be me? I thought my hair looked good. I don't have any idea what you're talking about there, John. I'll have to talk to Tommy and find out. All right, let's get it going. Welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about shapers, and Larry G is probably the reason why this show is happening, because he said he was afraid of shapers, which is a pretty common theme amongst woodworkers. They hear the word shaper, as long as it's not attached to origin, and they immediately freak out. And I'm hopefully going to acquaint you guys a little bit with what this machine is, how it works, and why it's not really all that unsafe, particularly if you add a couple of different accessories to it. The first thing I'd like to say is, hey, thanks for coming back. Last week, we did have a little bit of a family emergency, and things worked out really well in the end, but it didn't, we didn't really know everything that was going on until over the weekend. So it all came out in the end. So we're good. Thank you guys for the patience. Two-wheeled gator. Oh yeah, Florida is just fine. Okay, so the big thing that you're going to see if you look at what I've got here in front of me is it's a fairly compact machine. It's not overly large, although some of the ones that you can buy now, I know Felder and Hammer have some great ones with sliding tables, which make using these cutters back here just a snap. But if you really look at it, the overall appearance isn't all that much different than a router table, other than the fact that it's got a shaft on there, that you mount the cutters to. But essentially, this is just a big, heavy router table. The router isn't removable, obviously. I'm going to switch up the camera there, and we're going to take a look. John says he went through Hazleton on Sunday. I'm really sorry. Wrong camera. Right camera. All right. So you saw the shaft that I had up on top, and that comes down. That's part of this spindle assembly right here, and it's held in with a split collar into the machine itself. This is a Powermatic Model 26, which I don't even think they make this anymore. Most of the shapers are pretty much a spindle of some sort with a belt-driven motor, depending on what size motor you have, it's going to really determine whether or not this thing is really functional in your shop the way it ought to be. This one's pretty easy. You loosen those two bolts, and then this plate back here slides to tension the belt. Pretty straightforward stuff. There's really not a whole lot of complexity to this thing. The biggest thing you're seeing when you look at all of that, all the internals, and then if I go back to the wide shot, what you're seeing is all of that mass. And that mass is what helps make a really smooth cut. I've got a few cutters over here and a few different accessories that I can switch out my spindle on this thing. Now they change depending on the manufacturer. Yours may change differently than mine. I know at the woodworking shows, I had a combo machine out one year, and to switch out the spindle on the hammer was a totally different process. It just, with a wrench and a lock, you just pop it loose and it comes right out. I've got another spindle here. I'm going to switch cameras again to that second camera. Is it normal to have pulleys offset from their center line? I'm going to go back to that close-up shot on the inside there and try and figure out what you're talking about there. So it may just be my camera angle, but this pulley, and it's a two-step pulley here. I've got a fast speed and a slow speed, and the top section of the pulley on the spindle is in line with the top pulley on the motor, as well as the two bottoms. They are lined up. It may be the shot that's making them look a little out of alignment, but they aren't. Oh, Andrew's here. Very nice. Yeah, the woodworking shows are a great big vacuum in a whole bunch of our lives. All right, let's see. Hopefully that answered your question there about the pulleys being offline on their center. If I go back to the close-up shot, so I've got one of the spindles here, and you can see I can rotate that shaft without the spindle itself rotating. So the way that Powermatic made these was this has a nut on the bottom, which I loosened before I started the camera because I wanted to be able to take it out of there. Of course, I forgot to unseat it's got a Morse taper on it here at the top, but there's a shaft that comes down a threaded rod, and I can take that off. This is a 3/4 inch spindle. The one that's in the machine at the moment is a 1-inch spindle. And I also have a half-inch spindle, not a 1/4 inch. I've also got a router collet. Now this has a 1/2 inch opening, but I can also throw a sleeve in there that'll take it down to 1/4 inch. I can run router bits in this thing pretty easily. So, I think I just saw a tiny little bit of rust on there that's going to stop that from going all the way in. I'm not sure if it'll show up. Sure it will when I move closer. Here, I've got an indexing pin, that's right in the top of that tapered section. And if I show you the spindle itself, there's a little groove that's cut into the taper so that when this all goes together, should it go together? At the moment, it's not. So we'll try it again with that 3/4. I don't change out the spindles very often, so there's a light coating of rust showing up on some of these things. And when that slides down in there, it's a little sticky. So I'm not going to force it because that's going to cause me a lot of trouble. But the pin lines up with the groove in the shaft. Now I can't get it out of there. That's what I was saying, folks. Real woodworking going on here, not edited for your viewing pleasure. And then it's got a tapered nut on there. Let's see if I can get it to focus. Maybe not. There we go. So the nut is tapered on the one end, and that goes in and seats into the taper that's cut into the bottom of the shaft and pulls everything tight. Okay, pretty easy stuff, and you can see it's not a dainty little thing. So by the time you add all of this mass to what's going on there, it absorbs an awful lot of the vibration of the machine and of the cutter as it's cutting through the material. Most of my cutters, I run almost exclusively. I'm going to throw this stuff off to the side because it's just in my way. I run almost exclusive. You can get 1.25 inch shafts if you were to go with, I know Felder sells them with 30 mil shafts, or, I don't think they go much bigger than that. But what it does is the larger that shaft is, you're going to get a lot less vibration out of this thing, which means you're going to get a much, much, much smoother cut. The other advantage that you have with a shaper over your router table, there's a couple of advantages you have. It's all that mass going to make that smoother cut. You're not limited to the largest router you can find. It spins at a much slower rate. I think my top speed on this is about 6,000 or 8,000 RPMs as opposed to 20,000 on my router. So that slower cut means I can control it a whole lot more, particularly if I'm into really figured stuff. It's going to it's not going to grab and pull and tear as much as if it was a router itself. I'm going to zoom in a little and see if we can't get you to take a look at the shaper cutter that I've got on there. It's just a 3-wing cutter, and it's a raised panel cutter. And it's probably a lot bigger than what you're used to seeing if you're doing your raised panels on a router table. But of course I zoomed in so much that I didn't leave myself any space on that side where you could actually see the piece that I had run. Let's get the camera set up right. There we go. Much, much better. So I have a reversing switch on my motor here, so it'll turn clockwise or counterclockwise. One of the things that that's always puzzled me about people that run shapers is they'll take this cutter and they'll mount it into the shaper this way. And that's how they'll run it. They'll have their board down on the table like that and the cutter above it. Now, if for some chance I have a really long piece of wood and I'm feeding this by hand and it tilts up at all, I've just ruined my work. For me, I run it with the cutter down at the table level, and my board runs this way. Of course, it's not adjusted, but you get the general concept here is this is down, properly adjusted for height, and my cutter is here underneath of the wood, kind of like that. I also have a bearing for this that I would put on here to stop this from diving in too far. I also have a fence, which is the other thing I wanted to talk about. The fence that came with this thing is kind of useless. It's I sort of relate it to the miter gauge that you get with every table saw out there other than a slider. And the idea here is I'm running this thing in a clockwise fashion. So I'm feeding from, if you're in front of the machine, you're feeding from left to right, not right to left. Some people might say, oh, that's going to cause the nut to loosen as you run it. But the reality is I have a washer with a tab on it. You can see maybe in that spindle, there's a groove cut in there right here. Okay. And the washer has a little tongue on it and it fits right in there. And then you bring the nut down on top. And what that does is it sort of locks everything in so that it doesn't loosen up as you run the thing in what we would consider the reverse. So Michael says, not ideal for small router bits due to the reduced RPM. I think mine is 10 and 12,000. You have a shaper that's 10 and 12,000? And some of the machines out there actually have more steps than mine. I'm going to back up just a tiny bit. There we go. So when I run in this fashion, my wood is covering the cutter. Number one, that makes it safer. Number two, if I were to lift up on my board, because I can't go down because I'm up against the table, but if I lift up, all I have to do is run the cutter again. If Michael was talking about the idea that the router bits need to run at faster RPMs, I run mine at, I think it's like 6,000 or 8,000. I think I have it's probably 10 or 12,000 on the fast speed. Okay. So even at that, I try not to run it on there. Oops, wrong way. Sorry. Even when I run my handheld routers, I tend to dial them down because is everybody running out to buy shapers already? The idea is even when I run a handheld router, I'm running it at a slower speed because I've got a lot more control over it. Even small bits, quarter inch or whatever. The idea is I'm not overwhelming I'm not running real fast. I don't have a fast feed rate, and I also have a slow spindle rate because I just get a lot more control out of it. For me, when I run this thing, and hopefully the idea here is I put the fence on, and I just built literally a box with a hole in it. Put this down here where it started. To use as a fence so that I can position it any way I want. If I need a little longer table, I can run it at an angle. I've got plenty of room. It's all wood, so if you can see, I've actually sort of cut out the hole a little more here and there. I've run shaper cutters up into it a little bit to give a little bit of tighter clearance. It's pretty wide open, but you could put an extra face on there, make things tighter if you're running smaller bits, that kind of thing. The cool thing, like I said, for me about having a shaper as opposed to just a router table is if I want to do, which I don't do a lot, but if I want to run cope and stick cutters, that slower speed and that all of that mass means that I'm going to have a lot less chatter inside of that joint. I'm going to get a better, tighter joint from the cutters than I would off of my router. I've already got a miter slot set up that is parallel to the edge of the table, but it's, you know, it functions with just about any standard miter gauge. The groove is 3/8 by 3/4. So I could even make up a sled and use it to cut cope and stick things. In fact, there's a lot of companies out there that make cope and stick sleds for router tables that you could substitute and run on a shaper. Again, to me, the big thing that makes this more desirable is just the fact that you're going to get a cleaner cut out of it. If I throw that raised panel back up there, this is straight off the machine. It's not, and I'm going to try and zoom in on it so that you guys can see. That's as close as I can get, folks. I mean, you can see a tiny little bit of fuzz right there. Now, granted, this is a piece of mahogany, but there's virtually no sanding to be done on that. It's so clean. Now, if I'm going to suggest that you get a shaper, if you already have a router table, don't throw it away. If you have room for a shaper, to me, this is the advantage is I can get larger diameter cutters, which means I can make bigger moldings, bigger raised panels, all of those things than I can with a router. And to me, it's not as dangerous simply because I slow it down. And the other thing that I have for my shaper is a power feeder, which to me is an essential accessory for this thing. Once I set up with some of my larger, heavier cutters, and I've got a few here that are probably 5 or 10 pounds, some rather large crown molding cutters and things like that, that when I set it up on here and we're trying to run it, it's not exactly the kind of thing that you would want to run by hand, and the results wouldn't necessarily be all that good, because if you have that amount of, if I'm making a 4.5 inch or 5 inch crown molding that's standing up, you're running a 4 or 5 inch board through there, all of that carbide coming in contact with that wood, you're going to get a lot of chatter marks. If I put a power feeder on here, and I would show you mine, except mine's an industrial 3-phase monstrosity that weighs about 200 pounds. It takes 3 men and a small boy to get it on and off of the shaper, but I also throw it onto my table saw, and I throw it onto my router table. I mean, in fact, I think if you look at Instagram, somewhere there, I have stuff. I have some video. I think it was me running some stuff on the router table with the power feeder hooked up. The idea is, the minute I throw a power feeder on this thing, set my fence, set up my power feeder, and run it, even if it's for just a small job, just, you know, a handful of pieces, I'm going to get a much better result. We used it recently in a spice box class. We had backboards that we were putting into grooves in the back of the spice chest, and what we needed to do was just trying to get it back on camera now that I lifted it up and flipped it over. We were just trying to create a tongue on there. So you can see I used the shaper cutter with that raised panel, and I only ran it in. I mean, it might be a 1/4 of an inch deep. And if I ran it from both sides on a piece of 1/2 inch material or 3/4 inch material, which our backs weren't that thick, I can get down to the proper tongue thickness so that it would slide right in and out of the case pretty easily. To me, again, it's just, it's a good alternative. It's got more power than you're going to get out of a router-based tool. You're going to get a much cleaner cut. And even though my shop is not monstrous in size, I think it's still worth the square footage to keep this thing in the shop. I've got 2.5 horsepower routers and a really nice cast iron router table that sort of rivals this thing, but it can't turn the mass that I can get out of my shaper cutters. And all of that added mass leads to smoother cuts and a lot less cleanup time at the end of the day when you're making your parts. I don't know what else I want to say about this. This is going to be the first time that I've actually made this a Tuesday tips sort of happen on a normal schedule, unless you guys start asking a whole lot more questions about a shaper. I just don't, I think the fears are, people talk about how when something goes wrong with the shaper, people are losing arms and legs and all of this kind of stuff. And to be honest with you, if you're turning a big bit on your router table, even if you dial the speed down, you're still turning it at a lot more RPMs than what's going on the shaper usually. And when things go sideways on the router table, it happens at a lot faster speed. Sure, this cutter is a whole lot larger in diameter, but I'm also not exposing it. I'm not running it freehand like this, except when I'm making tombstone raised panels, and then I have a bearing on there, so I can't go in any farther. Just like with a router table, if I was going to make a tombstone raised panel on a router table, I would have a bearing bit, or I'd have to have an overhead bearing, which I have a setup for that too. That will be the source of another episode of Tuesday Tips. But what it allows me to do is go in and freehand around the top of that arch raised panel, which doesn't matter if you're running without a fence. All you have is a bearing. There's really no difference in the safety or the potential for getting hurt between the router and the shaper. This thing is not inherently more dangerous just because the cutters are larger. What it is people they get so petrified of it that they're uncomfortable running it, which means they're already halfway into a dangerous situation. If you guys ever saw my table saw thing at the woodworking shows, that was one of the things that I emphasized right from the beginning is you need to have a healthy respect for your power machinery, but you can't be afraid of it, because if you're afraid, if that fear gets in there, you aren't focused on the right things. You need to focus on where your hands are, where the wood is. If something goes wrong, where is the wood going to go and where are my hands going to go? that's the case. It doesn't matter whether it's a table saw, a joiner, a bandsaw, or a shaper, or a router table. All of those basic things have to happen. All of that stuff has to go through your mind in order to run the machine safely. Every time I run this thing, every time I run just about every machine, I go through it all in my head long before I turn the power on and have the material pass through the cutter, the blade, whatever. Even a bandsaw, I'm thinking about how I'm going to make the cut before I turn the saw on, because I want to know if everything goes sideways and this thing starts to implode, what's going to happen to the wood? Is it going to come back? Is it going to hit me? Am I out of the path of the wood? Are my hands and my other body parts out of the path of whatever is happening on the machine? I don't want to get tied up in the cutter with my fingers, my hands, my toes, nothing. Okay? So you have to think ahead and be engaged with what you're doing, and you can't do that if you're focused on your fear. So honestly, once you get past that, this thing just becomes a different kind of router table, and it runs smoother. Most of the folks that have taken classes here that we have run raised panels, or we were using it to trim parts, the size, those kinds of things. We make up little jigs. I have a flush cutting bit for this thing, believe it or not, that's about 3 inches in diameter and about 3.5 inches tall. You can make a jig that will flush trim parts, so that you can make a whole bunch of the same part over and over and over again. And once you get it set up and you run it, you sort of realize, like, okay, I've thought about how I'm going to run this thing. I've set it up so that if everything goes sideways, the chances of me getting hurt are severely minimized. And it's not all that bad in the end. It really does a nice job, something that you just can't get with a router. Let's see what those questions are. Am I going to talk about power feeders? Okay, or let's see. What have I got here? Absent a bargain at an estate, what sort of woodwork does one need to do to justify having this tool? Moldings? Yeah. And you don't have to be doing them on huge quantities. Okay? To be honest with you, if I was going to make a single piece of furniture that had six feet of crown, 6 feet of mid molding, and 6 feet of base molding, this is my go-to over the router, if I have it out in the shop and set up, simply because I can set up this machine with a power feeder on there and I get a much better result. It takes a few more minutes to set up than the router table, but once I get it set up, particularly if I have some shaper cutters that have the profiles that I'm looking for. And that's the great thing, is I have so many cutters that I've had custom ground over the years that I can set up, and we can run a really complex mid molding, say. You can set it up, you run it just like a router, you do things in multiple passes, you're not taking things all in one solid depth of cut. You're creeping up on it like we always do with things, right? So is it the first machine I'd run out and buy? Nope. That would probably be a bandsaw or a table saw. My second and third machine would be a joiner and a planer, and then I'd come back and eventually this would be something that I would include. The great thing about a router, you're going to have routers in that first grouping of things simply because routers are so versatile, handheld, and you can always make temporary router tables out of a piece of plywood and a drill. You don't really need anything super fancy. Vincent, the shaper far exceeds raised panel milling due to its power. They don't use motors. They use brushes. Right, exactly. These things, yeah, being belt driven and a real motor, a real large motor. That I only have a 3 horsepower. I'm not crazy. I don't have a 5 or a 7 horsepower shaper. That in itself is one of the drawbacks to this thing. If you go down to a small enough motor that you can run it on a 110 outlet, it's probably undersized. Running 3 or 5 horsepower is probably what you want to get in the end, but that also sort of means you're going to have a 220 circuit for it. Not a bad thing, but Douglas says he has a small jet shaper and he uses that for everything now. I haven't used the router table in years. I also have the chuck for the routers, works with everything. Yep, exactly. Michael says he uses his hundreds of feet of tongue and groove flooring and wall covering, obviously with a power feeder. Yep. Does my table have a flat top in the X and Y, or is it a crown to help with milling? No, mine's flat. That was just like when I went and taught the classes at the woodworking shows on the table saw. I took a straight edge, checked it in all my directions across the length, across the width, and diagonally, and made sure my tabletop was flat before I went ahead and purchased it. I don't believe in that crowning thing. That's kind of, it's like people that tow their rip fence out a little on the backside. My thoughts there are you're building an inherent creep away from the rip fence when you're ripping things. So that's when things go sideways. So Larry wants to know, can I explain the advantages or the strategies of running it forward or reverse? Okay, so forward, like it's a router, means I have to mount, and I'll try and get that second camera sort of focused in here so you can see a little better what I was talking about. I know you're seeing me adjust my camera, sorry. Once again, not edited for your viewing pleasure. So if you look at the way this cutter is set up, okay, you can see the raised panel part of this is now above. So if I'm running this, I have to run it that way to get this profile that I showed you earlier. Technically speaking, that's the way you want to run it in order to run it forward, which is from the right to the left, which is how you would run a router table. The problem there is this cutter is over top of my material. And that's what I was saying is if I get dust or a piece of a scrap of wood or something that ends up underneath of this and this lifts up at all, it's cutting deeper into my material and ruining my cut. So for me, the strategy or the logic behind running it in reverse, which is what this orientation is, it does 2 things. It keeps the cutter down below the surface of the table, which means now my work is riding above the cutter. So number 1, that makes it safer because it's got to go all the way through the wood to get to my fingers. I'm still not putting my fingers directly over the cutter, but it's like having all this material between you and the cutter on a jointer. The idea is it's got to eat its way through the entire board to get to me. Chances of that happening, not 0, but also not very high. The other thing is, as I said before, running it from left to right means, because this thing has to now spin clockwise as opposed to counterclockwise, means that there's a possibility that the nut's going to come loose on the spindle. But like I said, as far as I've never seen that happen. I mean, I've never had it happen. If some of the guys that work for me had it happen, it was because they didn't tighten the nut down to begin with. So now I'm back to MJ with the, or am I going to talk about power feeders? Honestly, my experience is fairly limited. I've been a couple of places where we've used one of the larger Grizzlies. Mine is a Festo, and it looks like it's straight out of the 50s. And like I said, it weighs about 200 pounds. It's a massive thing, and it's 3-phase power. It's about a half horsepower, but in real terms, it would probably be equal to something that's a horse or a horse and a half, either as a jet or a Grizzly. Yeah, maybe what I could do is I'll throw that in the rotation. I'll pull my power feeder out, and we'll throw it in, and I can show you the parts of the power feeder, and I can actually run it. And show you how it works. Mine feeds. It has a couple of speeds forward and I think it's 4 speeds forward and 4 speeds backwards. So that I can actually, not that I'm suggesting that you should, in fact, I'm suggesting that you don't. You could actually climb cut with it, which is a really bad thing, because if you're climb cutting and something isn't adjusted properly, it just completely explodes. So not a good idea. Yeah, we'll talk about power feeders down the road there. How much horsepower would be the minimum for a power feeder for the shaper? Honestly, if you were 3/4 of a horse or higher, I would think you would be okay, because it doesn't really have to be a super heavy duty kind of a thing. I know Grizzly makes, and I've seen, like Izzy Swan has one of the really tiny ones, the only thing that's holding me back from getting one of those is the price. I can't justify spending the money on that tiny little power feeder when I've got a monster here, other than the fact that it would be really convenient to throw it on any machine to power feed. There are the folks at Felder actually sell a lot of their joiners in combination with power feeders, so that you can set a power feeder up on your joiner and run it so that your hands are never anywhere near that cutter head. So I would say at least a 3/4. Wouldn't a good overarm router be better for multiple parts? It depends on what it is. Sometimes overarm routers are good. I have one. It's a portable one, and we use it for gooseneck moldings and things like that are smaller. Larger goosenecks I'm doing here on the shaper with bearings or overhead ways to hold to follow a pattern. There are a lot of things you can mess around with on this tool. And again, the big advantage to a shaper is all of that mass just gives you a much cleaner cut. And again, you're not taking, if I'm making a cove molding that's 1.5 inches high and 1.5 inches deep, it's a perfect quarter round. I'm not taking it in one pass just because I have a bigger machine. It's, you're still doing things in 3-4 passes to get there. You wouldn't run a router at the final depth on your router table unless you wanted to ruin the router, ruin the work, and cause yourself a lot of headaches. So to me, it's just it's different tools. Once again, I go back to the more tools you have, the more problems you can solve. So if you have room in your shop for a shaper and an overarm router and a router table, now I can solve all kinds of problems that I couldn't if I only had one. So if you're looking for an excuse to go buy all of those things, you can tell them, I told you you needed it. If you have to justify it to a significant other. It's a lot safer when it is mounted under the workpiece, and you'll get less pinched kickback. Correct. When the cutter is below the wood, it's safer, less chance of ruining the work, and there's more meat between you and the cutter. So, right. That's what I was looking for, is just to try and get some kind of. Vincent says it was a very informative discussion. Thank you. That was really all these Tuesday nights. That's what this is about. Let's get in here. I'll give you my reasons why I think this is better, or why I think that's better, or what the advantages and disadvantages are. Main disadvantages to a shaper: most likely you're going to have to run a 220 circuit for it. It will run all your router bits. If you don't have shaper cutters, you could spend a small fortune just on shaper cutters in the end, especially if you're getting them custom ground. That kind of stuff. I also have a loose knife cutter head, which sounds like it's a whole lot more dangerous than it is, but I've ground a lot of my own cutters for it, and it has locking edges on there, so everything is locked in. It's not like, I forgot to tighten something up, and the next thing I know, there's high-speed steel projectiles coming out of the cutter, flying all over the shop. Or that, again, probably not the first thing that I would buy, but once you've got some shaper time under your belt, again, treat it like a great big router table. You're going to set your fence. You're going to, instead of feather boards, you can use feather boards on here, but it's so much better even if you get a small power feeder. You're not going to, even if you had a half horsepower, that tiny little one that I was talking about from Grizzly, or now there's a bunch of companies that are selling them. You're just going to slow the feed rate down so that you're going to cut. It's not like, oh, this thing is going to immediately kick the board out because I've only got a little half horsepower power feeder. The idea is you're going to take smaller cuts, you're going to slow the feed rate down, and you'll just take more successive cuts to get to your end than I would with a much heavier machine. Sorry, I jumped ahead there. I'll sometimes. So I'll address that here. I bought a American rotary generator, good for a 7.5. I'm assuming, yeah, you're talking about a rotary phase converter. It has has been problem free for 9 years, and it runs a table saw joiner combo sand and a 20-inch bandsaw. Only use one machine, right? So you can buy a rotary phase converter. There's a new company out there that makes static phase converters that is really good. They used to be like years and years ago. Static phase converters were you buy them and throw them away immediately, and the technology has come along so quickly. That's just a whole different discussion on phase converters. Oh yeah, the hub are generally quarter horsepower. Again, you can make it work. You're just going to take a lot shallower cuts, a lot more cuts overall, and you're going to that feed rate's going to be pretty slow. So you'll just do it. But what I hear from people that are doing this avocationally is, I'm in no hurry. I have no deadline. So if it doesn't matter how long it takes, the quarter horsepower, I'm going to step up to like I said, I'm thinking 3/4 gets you through just about everything you need. You can put enough downward pressure on the wheels, on the tires, on that power feeder, and take a reasonable cut with your shaper that you're not going to have to worry at all about the piece kicking out or stalling or any of that stuff. Phase converters are a good thing. I have one here that I've had for, it's got to be, it's 20, 25 years at least. It's a little it runs up to a 3 horsepower motor, and it will run up to 3 of those at a time. At my old shop, I had one that would run a 15 horsepower motor, and it would run 45 aggregate. So that one that runs 7.5 horsepower, probably you could run 3 or 4 machines. You just can't start them all at once. You would have to start one, let it come up to full speed, then start another one and run it again. Usually it's there. You'll see somewhere on the phase converter, it'll have, how do we get on the phase converter? It'll have, it'll have somewhere on there what the largest motor you can run, and then what the aggregate is. And usually the aggregate is 3 times what the largest motor is you can run. 120, 220 volts, same wire, just a different breaker and receptacle. In some cases, that's so. In other cases, it's not, and some of that's code dependent. Your best bet is to check with an electrician. But essentially, 220 is just 2 110 lines coming in the same. So when you get into the 3-phase, that things start to get a little wonky, because now you've got 2 legs the same and a third leg of a different voltage. But that's a different thing. I'm 66 and a half. I have dead lines. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, that was always my thing, Vincent. I always looked at people and I said, really, you have no deadlines. So you get too much time in your shop, and you have all of your projects done, so much so that you no longer have a honey-do list. You are way better than me, because it doesn't matter how much I get done, that list keeps growing. What types of fences and safety guards do you use and recommend? Well, you saw my main fence on my shaper is just a plywood box that I created. It's got a hole in the back that I can jam a 4-inch dust collection hose into, and it's kind of cut out oblong so that I squish the hose to stick it in there. When I used the combo machine on the woodworking show circuit from Hammer, it had a really nice independently adjustable fence. That's the thing. Even Powermatic and Jet have dramatically improved their fences for their shapers. They now have micro adjustments for stuff. The fence that came with this thing, I have it somewhere. It's buried somewhere. It weighs about 40 pounds, and the 2 fences adjust independently, but it's like you loosen a great big T handle, and then you just slide it to wherever you want. There's no micro adjustments. There's none of that nonsense. So if I'm looking for a fence for my shaper, I want something that I can easily, very accurately adjust the position of the 2 fences. I want them to be independent of one another. For mine, because I made a plywood box, if I need to do something where I'm shaping off the full edge, I need to put a packer or a sacrificial strip on the outfeed side that is the exact thickness of the material that I'm taking off. Otherwise, I have to build snipe into if I need a 5-foot piece of molding, I got to run a 6-foot piece because I end up with a snipe at the end. So having an independently adjustable fences is a really great option if you can find them. And again, micro adjustables way better than just kind of loosen it and shove it wherever you want. Safety guards and things like that. This thing has a ring guard that came with it. It mounts on a post that screws into the back of the tabletop here. I think I've only ever tried to use it once because it was just in the way. You can't see what's going on. So generally speaking, if I can, I mean, I could, if I'm going to do something freehand, normally what I do is I cut out just a piece of plywood or something, block it up in the back, have it come over, drill a hole in it so that it goes around the shaft that hangs out here, so that the only thing it just covers up the cutter as much as I can. And that way, if I'm if I'm running up against the bearing, at least there's something stopping me from just inadvertently dropping a board and having it just come right down on the cutter head. But I don't like it to the point where it's going to impede my seeing what's happening. Once again, I harken back to my woodworking show table saw thing. I'm engaging all 5 senses when I'm running this tool. One of those is my sight. I can see things that are starting to happen and feel it with my fingers, hear it and smell it and taste it happening before everything goes completely off the rails. And to put it in the table saw veins, because that's the easiest one. If you're running something on the table saw and you hear the motor start to bog down, that means something's pinching and binding. You can smell it. Depending on the type of wood, it's either going to taste sweet or it's going to taste bitter, because whatever's burning and that minute bits of sawdust are going to come up and hit your tongue because you're breathing, you're working and all of that kind of stuff. You're going to taste things, you're going to smell things, you're going to feel things, you're going to see things, you're going to hear them long before it all explodes. So pay attention to all of those warning signs when something doesn't look, feel, smell, taste, see, whatever, hear, sound right. Shut the machine down, try and figure out what's going on. And that's probably the biggest safety thing that I'm going to tell you with any tool: shaper, router table, joiner, planer, table saw, chop box, anything. If something's not functioning the way the tool does when you don't have a load on it, if I turn on my table saw, it sounds and it runs a certain way. When I start to feed the wood into it, I hear things. Sure, it's going to change a little bit, but what the normal sound is. When those normal sounds change, when the normal amount of pressure to feed something changes, when the normal amount of dust and smoke coming off of the cutter changes, there's something bad happening, and it's time to stop and figure out what it is before it's too late. These don't grow back. Okay, so hold downs as well. Yeah, you can, like I said, you could use feather boards on here, above, coming in from the table, all of that stuff. Again, my solution to that is, hey, run out and get yourself a little power feeder. It'll change your world. The best is when you're ripping a whole lot of parts on the table saw and it comes off absolutely perfectly clean, no saw marks. I saw a number 4 Northfield on Marketplace in Massachusetts, pristine offer for $2,000. Same guy selling your saw for $2,000. What do I think? I really have no clue. For me, I would go look at the thing and I would start by checking the table to make sure it's perfectly flat. I would make sure that it's easy to move the change out the cutters and the shafts. I would make sure that there's no run out on the shaft. I would run it and make sure that it's the shafts look like they're running smoothly. Make sure your belts, pardon me, aren't dry rotted and falling apart. Because I can tell you, this isn't available anymore through Powermatic, and they don't sell the parts. Last time I replaced the belt, I had to measure it, and then I ordered. They're actually washing machine belts to run this thing. So I have a whole bunch of them, so that if they don't hold up like the Powermatic did, which was for 20 years, I can replace it pretty easily. Let's see, what else do we got there? The fence on the number 4 was like a brick and perfectly parallel. That's a really good thing. 18-inch bandsaw, 154-inch. Looks like you're getting all kinds of good deals out there. John's just having fun looking at looking for old machinery. Yeah, my shop used to have a bunch of old stuff in there. I have a lot more hammer stuff and newer tools these days, simply because I got tired of trying to fix all of that, early 20th century stuff that, they don't make parts for it anymore. So you have to have it machined. Or you've got to try and figure out how to rig it up a different way so that you can do it with all the modern parts and stuff like that. That's the only thing I see is if you're not into the hobby of fixing and maintaining and working on the machines themselves, that's where I would look at new versus old. If what your hobby is the woodworking aspect of it, then new makes a little bit more sense, unless it's, recently used. If it's a 5-year-old table saw or shaper or whatever, as opposed to, a 30-plus-year-old shaper that Powermatic doesn't make and doesn't stock any of the parts for anymore. But if part of your hobby is fixing up the machines, I mean, one of the best times I ever had, I had a 36-inch crescent bandsaw that was literally a barn find. A friend of mine found it and had it for a long time, never did anything with it, so I bought it off him for a few $100, and I took it all apart, sandblasted the body down, repainted it. It was already bushed out with bronze bushings instead of Babbitt bearings. It was just a ton of fun to work on, to create the thing, to get the thing, reset up and running again. And once it was running in the shop, it ran like a dream. It's a massive piece of equipment. And like I said, if anything ever broke on it, I'd have to figure out how to get it machined to fix it. So how do you dial in the cutter height, like when matching rail and style cutters or lock miter joints? Well, my shaper cutters for my cope and stick cutters are indexed. So if I put them in this fashion, they will always be at the exact same height based off of where they fall on my shaft. So if I drop this on, which I can't right now because I've got the 1-inch shaft in there and these are 3/4. But if I drop them in, they stop at the shoulder on the shaft, and that's repeatable. Okay, so if I put this in and then I put this in the same orientation, what it means is I have to run my machine one direction forward, it's turning counterclockwise, and the other is turning clockwise. So to me, that's another advantage of this, as opposed to if I'm running a router table, with cope and stick cutters, I have to raise the router or take the router out of the router table, switch out the cutters, and then I have to readjust everything. Here, everything's indexed off of the shoulder that's on the shaft. So once I get it set, it's set for both halves. Same thing with my tongue and groove cutter. Once I get it set, all I do is switch the cutters and reverse the motor, and I'm running. Or lock miter joints. I'm not really a huge lock miter fan, but I know Infinity makes a really great one. Infinity Tools down there outside of Tampa, and they have this. They have a setup tool that comes with it that literally you put the thing in. I mean, it's for the router table. It's not for the shaper, but when you could probably make up something similar in order to set up a shaper cutter. So what Infinity does is they have this tool that you run one part of it, then you switch the cutter, and you literally put the template right up against it, and it lines it up again perfectly. And yes, that Crescent was fun. The best part was it had a 10 horsepower motor on it, single phase, 10 horsepower motor, and each 36-inch wheel weighed probably about 150 pounds. So when you turned it off, you could run into the other room, come back, still cut something, run into the room, come back and cut something again, and never have to turn the machine back on. So, all right, folks, we've been here I thought I was getting out on time, and here we are half an hour later. It always seems to be the way it is with these things. Once again, thanks for coming out. I don't remember. I forgot to look at. It's been a pretty crazy week and a half for me. And once again, I forgot to look at the schedule to see what's on for next week. So don't forget, if you like this, and you're watching this on YouTube, please like the video, subscribe, hit the notification button. If you aren't already subscribed, go to the website right down here, sign up for the newsletter. I'll send you an email reminder at some point, and it'll tell you what the topic is for next week, because I am mostly unconscious at this point. It's been, like I said, it's been a very long week and a half. So I do appreciate you guys coming out. Thanks again, and I will see you next Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Have a good night, everybody.